Have you ever really thought about what happens when you get a cut? In a matter of seconds, your body kicks off this incredible, life-saving cascade of events. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that microscopic emergency response system that, well, stops you from bleeding.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the immediate first responders. What happens the very instant a blood vessel is damaged? Then, we are going deep into the classic playbook, the coagulation cascade itself. After that, we'll check out a more modern, cell-based view of how this all really goes down. And to wrap it up, we'll talk about the crucial off switches and the cleanup crew, and really get into why this whole system's balance is, quite literally, a matter of life and death.
All right, so imagine it happens. A vessel gets torn, and blood starts leaking out. What's the body's first move? Well, it's all about immediate, fast-acting damage control.
I mean, think about it. We get these little nicks and cuts all the time and just take it for granted that they'll stop. But that tiny paper cut triggers one of the most sophisticated alarm systems in your body, one that keeps a minor inconvenience from turning into a major disaster.
The fancy name for this whole operation is hemostasis, but it's not just one single event. You can think of it more like a two-act play. Act 1 is the quick emergency patch. Act 2 is bringing in the heavy-duty reinforcements to make it stick.
So that first act is called primary hemostasis. The second a blood vessel tears, it exposes stuff that's normally hidden on the inside, like collagen. Platelets, these little cell fragments just cruising through your blood, see that exposed collagen and they stick to it instantly. They activate, change their shape, and start shouting out chemical signals, basically screaming, "Hey, everybody get over here!" More platelets rush to the scene, and they all pile up to form a quick, but pretty weak, plug. It's kind of like stuffing a towel in a leaky pipe. It's a temporary fix, but it's not going to hold forever.
Right, so that temporary plug just isn't going to cut it for the long term. To really seal the deal and let the vessel heal, the body needs to build something way, way stronger. And that, my friends, is where the main event comes in, the coagulation cascade.
Now, the classic way we think about this cascade involves two different starting points. You've got the extrinsic pathway, which gets triggered by trauma outside the blood vessel when something called tissue factor is exposed. And then you have the intrinsic pathway, which kicks off when something happens inside the vessel. You can think of them as two different fire alarms in different locations that both set off a chain reaction racing toward the exact same outcome.
Okay, let's look at the extrinsic pathway first. This is the fast one, the express lane. You get a cut, tissue factor gets exposed, it immediately grabs a partner, factor 7, and flips its on switch. This new power couple, tissue factor and activated factor 7, has one main job: find the manager of this whole operation, factor 10, and get it working. It's a super direct and rapid response to injury.
Now, the intrinsic pathway, this one is more like a beautiful set of falling dominoes. It all starts when factor 12 gets switched on. That then activates factor 11, which activates factor 9. Finally, activated factor 9 teams up with its partner, factor 8, and together they also activate our main player, factor 10. So you might be asking, why bother with this longer route? It's all about amplification. This pathway takes that initial whisper of an alarm and turns it into a deafening roar, making sure the final response is absolutely overwhelming.
And here's the brilliant part. It doesn't matter if the alarm was triggered from the outside or the inside. All roads lead to factor 10. It's the critical junction point. From here on out, there's only one path to the finish line, the common pathway.
And this is the grand finale. Activated factor 10, or 10A, joins forces with its helper, factor 5A. Together they become a super enzyme. Their mission? Find a protein called prothrombin and activate it, turning it into thrombin. And thrombin is the real MVP here. It finds a protein called fibrinogen, which is just floating around dissolved in the blood, and it snips it into little pieces that are insoluble. These pieces are called fibrin, and they link together to form what is basically biological rebar, a tough, sturdy mesh that weaves itself through that initial platelet plug, locking it down and creating a truly solid clot.
And the power of this cascade is just mind-blowing. Get this, for every one single molecule of factor 10 that gets activated, it can crank out about 1,000 molecules of thrombin. 1,000! This is what's known as the thrombin burst. It's an explosive amplification that ensures a rock-solid clot forms exactly where you need it, and fast.
Now, that classic model of the two pathways is super useful for getting the concepts down, but we now know it's a little more interconnected in real life. The modern view shows us how these reactions actually take place on the surfaces of cells, especially on those activated platelets we talked about.
So this cell-based model has 3 phases. It starts with initiation, where that initial tissue factor exposure creates just a tiny little spark of thrombin. Then comes amplification, where that small amount of thrombin acts like a primer, supercharging all the nearby platelets and other key factors. And finally, you get propagation. This is when the reaction absolutely explodes on the surface of those platelets, leading to that massive thrombin burst and the final, stable fibrin clot.
Okay, a system this powerful has to have some serious breaks, right? I mean, if this cascade just kept going unchecked, a little paper cut could cause your entire circulatory system to clog up. So, how does the body stop it from going into overdrive? Well, your body has its own built-in police force of natural anticoagulants. You can see some of them here. These proteins are always on patrol, and their one and only job is to hunt down and shut off the activated clotting factors. They make sure the clot is contained right at the site of injury and doesn't spread where it's not wanted.
And of course, once the vessel wall is healed, you don't need that clot anymore. So the cleanup crew comes in. This process is called fibrinolysis. Cells around the wound release a substance called TPA, which activates an enzyme called plasmin. And plasmin is basically a molecular wrecking ball for clots. It systematically dissolves that fibrin mesh, breaking the whole thing down and restoring normal, smooth blood flow.
So after all that, why is understanding this cascade so incredibly important? Because your health, your very life depends on it performing this constant, high-stakes balancing act perfectly.
Because it all comes down to balance. If the system goes into overdrive, you get thrombosis, that's unwanted clots blocking up blood vessels, which is what causes heart attacks and strokes. But if the system is too weak, you get bleeding disorders, where the body can't form clots effectively, making even a small injury potentially life-threatening. And here's a really sobering thought. We tend to think of bleeding out as the biggest danger, but the clinical reality is that far more people die from thrombosis, from too much clotting, than from not being able to clot at all. It just really drives home how vital those control systems are. Which really leaves you with this incredible thought. What manages this hair-trigger system when there isn't an injury? Right now, inside you, this whole army of factors and inhibitors is in constant circulation, performing a silent, intricate dance, perfectly poised between saving you from a bleed and causing a fatal clot. It's an amazing system that protects you every single second of the day. Thanks for diving into this with us.